What's up, everybody? It's Guubums back with another guide video. For those of you guys who don't know who I am, I'm Guubums. I'm a competitive player from NA, former rank 1, and have been rank 1 pretty much every set since I started playing. And pretty much, yeah, I make guide videos. If you guys like the content, please, leave a like, subscribe, and I guess comment down below on what more you'd like to see. But otherwise, let's just get into the video. So today I have a video about the strongest augment in the game currently, generically. It's built different. So for those of you guys who don't know what this is, it's pretty much an augment that entirely changes the way you play the game. Pretty much the way it works is that any units you have on your board that don't have any active traits gain a certain amount of stats based on the stage. So if you guys have played TFT kind of like for a long time, you would know that this is kind of like one of the more unique augments in the game in that like it really changes the way you play the game. I find that like less experienced players often find ways to skip this augment just because they're not very used to it. So I guess like in creating this video, my hope is that like players that don't have that much experience kind of like playing around something like this are going to be less afraid to take it, just because one, it's a really strong augment right now. It's pretty much just free LP, and two, because of like the uniqueness of the augment, it just makes it like kind of like a really enjoyable experience. For the longest time, it actually was my favorite augment in the game. But yeah, I mean, let's just get into it. So pretty much the way it works is that if you guys have played it for a long time, you'll know that Built Different in the past was really reliant on kind of like streaking the early game and then not scaling too well towards the late game, just because it used to give a flat bonus, and then they changed it to be a scaling bonus based on the stage. But it turns out that nowadays, because they made it a scaling bonus, the bonuses in the early game just will not be able to compete with certain traits in the game that kind of obviously make your unit stronger. So most of the time you do not necessarily need to be loose streaking, and in the current meta, which is a heavy fast 8 meta where you're playing around 4 costs, you can just play the same way as pretty much everyone else, which is to go level 8 and then play around 4 costs. And that's really just kind of what makes this augment so strong, is that because everybody's playing around what we tend to say is like traitless 4 costs anyway, because like if you have an upgraded 4 costs, you can just play it on your board regardless of whether or not you're playing built diff. If you're playing built diff, obviously you're just going to get a lot of bonuses that other people will not have. There are a lot of 4 costs in the game that we are already considering traitless that you can play on pretty much any board. So yeah, it's just pretty much a free bonus, and therefore it's an extremely strong augment. I just have a list of like other augments you want to be like pairing with built diff. I want to get into this a little bit later, but first and foremost, I think I want to be talking about the units first, because I figured like that's going to be something that's a little bit more important and a little bit more relevant for most of the people watching this. So I made a little bit of a unit tier list. Doesn't have every single unit in the set attached to it, but like it's going to talk about like it's going to show you different types of units you're going to want to be playing at different stages. So first and foremost, these are the units that you pretty much play on every built diff board. You'll actually find late game that you're going to be playing multiple copies of a lot of these units, especially these 4 costs, just because they're the frontliners. When it says if a unit has no traits, obviously if I'm putting in 2 Annies, if one Annie has no trait, both Annies aren't have any traits. So you're going to find yourself playing 2 Annies a lot of the time, 2 Solaces, 2 Nautilus, 2 Orns. Pretty much every board will have at least one set of 2 copies of one of these units. So obviously, the most important part is going to be upgrades. So obviously once you're level 8, like you're going to want to be playing any upgrades you have. But say like one of the kind of like the benefits of playing this comp is that the money requirement is kind of changed a little bit, just because if you're looking to play for an Annie 2, right, that means obviously you're going to have an Annie pair at some point. And if you have an Annie pair at some point and you don't have them upgraded, it's perfectly acceptable to just put 2 Annies on your board, and that makes it really cheap to roll. Pretty much you're not being taxed to hold units onto your bench that are paired that you otherwise would be. Like for any other comp, like say I need to play for a Kai'Sa 2 while playing like trick shots, then I need to hold an extra Kai'Sa on my bench. Whereas for this comp, you don't have to hold it on your bench, it immediately goes on your board, which obviously removes a different unit that you would otherwise be playing that would cost you money to hold, right? So that's one of the benefits of this comp. So most of the time, especially in stage 4, when obviously your total gold value of total gold amassed throughout the game is going to be a little bit lower than obviously later stages in the game, you're going to find yourself playing a lot of like 2 Annies, 2 Solaces, 2 Nautilus, 2 Orns, any of like that. And then late game, you're really looking to cap out with like double Lysandra, just more upgrades of these units, so like double Nautilus 2, double Orn 2, stuff like that. And you're going to want to be holding extra copies. And one of the ways to really kind of like win with this comp is, especially right now, going for 3-star 4 costs in pretty much any comp is going to be a viable strategy. In built diff, it's even more so, because once again, you're already playing like 6 copies of a Solace because you're playing 2 Solace of 2s, right? Like, or like 6 copies of an Annie, same idea. So obviously one of the ways you can cap out is obviously just going for 2-star legendaries. Because this comp has access to 3-star 4 cost, that's another win con that other comps still have, but are less likely to hit than this comp. Most importantly are kind of like the frontliners, all go in S tier just because you're going to be playing them no matter what. But in the A tier, I put some of the backliners that you should be looking for. You'll notice that obviously some of these guys are 2 costs, right? And like, why is that relevant? So because you're not playing built diff, you're pretty much, because you're not on 8 the entire game, you are going to have to find units that carry your items. This is going to be true for every comp in TFT, but it's also true for built diff. And something about built diff is that because your units, a lot of their power is not tied to augment, the quality of the unit is going to be really, really important. So right now, you'll notice that people are kind of like extending Zyra far beyond what her cost would entail. So if you guys have watched high elo streams right now, it's a little bit of like, I guess like a high elo tech. Zyra is really, really strong. Like people will take Zyra 2 to a fast 9 if she has 3 items. Same with Janna. Lux is not true, but Lux has a lot of utility. Obviously, Lux shares the same trait as Lissandra, so immediately once you hit Lissandra, you're probably going to want to take out your Lux. But at the same time, because this is a comp that you're always going to be looking to play Lissandra in, Lux will fill in for Lissandra until you get there. Because if the idea is that you want to be playing around Lissandra, then that means since they have the same traits, that you'll be able to play around a Lux until you have Lissandra, right? And then Kai'Sa and Morgana are just the best generic backline units. Ashe actually is just as strong as Kai'Sa, if not stronger, but because immediately as soon as you find the Lissandra one, you have to put it in, then Ashe becomes a lot weaker, right? So say you have an Ashe 2 and you start itemizing her, and you neglected to pick up Kai'Sa's, well, now it's a little bit awkward as soon as you hit Lissandra. Well, realistically, if you have an Ashe 2 and you have items and you are carrying her, then frankly, you just can't play Lissandra. And the same is true for stuff like Azir, Lilia. Azir and Lilia are reasonable units to be playing in a built diff board, but because Azir pairs with both Annie and Ornn, and Lilia pairs with Annie in terms of they both get their traits activated, neither of these units are very easy to fit on your built diff board just because you always want to be playing Ornn. And you always want to be playing Annie, right? Janna's a little bit different. Obviously, throughout the mid game, you're going to be playing Invoker. You're going to be playing Janna without Invoker, and it's fine. Obviously, as soon as you hit an Annie, that's no longer going to be the case, and you're going to have to drop your Janna for maybe a different 4 cost, or even a 2 cost or a 3 cost that is more reasonable. Zyra specifically, her traits don't. You're never going to get Story Weaver in, so that's not even worth talking about. But Sage is something that doesn't really come online until you put in like Diana and Morgana. Diana is a fine unit on her own, but because you can't play Zyra, it's probably not that relevant to be playing her. Some of the other 3 cost frontliners that I didn't put on this tier list are going to be Lawi and Amumu. These are really, really strong early to mid game units just because at 1 star they're already really strong and they hold it together towards as soon as you get them 2 star. However, the issue with these units is because they share traits with some of the 4 cost frontliners you're going to be playing is that they share the same traits as well as fulfill the same role. So if I have a 2-star Amumu, how much better is a 2-star Amumu than a 1-star Nautilus in built diff? Well, maybe it is a decent bit better, but like once again, we talked about how we want to be playing 2 Nautiluses, right? So then how good is a 2-star Amumu versus 2 1-star Nautiluses? And then when you start like thinking about it like that, you start to realize why Amumu and Alawi start to fall off as you get into kind of like the later stages of the game, but are still like really valuable units to be playing in the mid game. And then like kind of moving past that, we have like some of the backliners you want to be playing in the early game. Alun's really strong if you don't have Janna or Darius. Obviously, Alun is an Invoker Umbral, so you can't be playing Darius, you can't be playing Janna. Ahri is really strong just in general. You'll never get faded in. It's a 3 trait, really easy to avoid putting it in. Arcanist is really good. Caitlyn's a little bit different. Both Sniper and Ghostly are 2 traits that you'll find yourself kind of like putting in decently often. Senna's another really good one, so you obviously can't pair them together. A lot of Ghostly frontliners are kind of pretty viable, such as Aatrox, such as Alawi. You do have to be look a little bit out for that, but because Caitlyn kind of like is a very much a caster, especially in the early game, built diff, giving her attack speed will kind of like let her cast them multiple times throughout a fight. Obviously, your team has a little bit of tank stats from built diff as well. So Caitlyn paired with certain items such as like damage items like Shojin, Deathblade are going to be really, really strong on Caitlyn, just because like every time she ults, she's pretty much going to pick up a kill, and then the fight proceeds pretty reasonable. Darius, honestly, Darius should be higher tier. Honestly, like top of A tier is probably not even an exaggeration for this guy, just because Darius without synergies, kind of like on a non-built diff board, is already the strongest stage 2 unit in the game. So like obviously with built diff, you're pretty much getting duelists for free. He's going to be extremely strong, right? This is a complete monster of a unit. You stack him, he will easily win streak you on stage 2. I would say most likely you are not getting a streak on stage 2 without Darius, just because built diff, once again, is a little bit weaker, a little bit on the weaker side in the early game. But yeah, with Darius 2, with multiple Darius 2s, you could definitely look to streak on stage 2. Obviously, it's, your augment is going to kind of like combat other people's augments for power. So in general, the strongest early game augments are going to be item augments, such as, you know, like Forge, I can't think of maybe that many other item augments off the top of my head. Sleight of hand, forge, pretty much anything that gives you items. Buried treasure is going to be some of the highest tempo augments in the game. So when you're coming up against those comps while you have built diff, chances are you're not going to be able to beat their board with similar board strength. But that being said, there are ways to go around that, because items kind of shrink in terms of relative value depending on the number of items everybody else has in the lobby, right? So for example, if you have a 5-item opener, then something like built diff becomes even stronger, just because someone else with an item augment will have less relative value, just because each individual item represents a lower percentage of their total item power, right? So yeah, that's it for units. Let's talk a little bit about items that you want to be building when you have built diff, and kind of like the items you want to be avoiding when you have built diff. So the single best item with built diff is going to be Thieves' Gloves. If you guys were a little bit perceptive on my first slide over here, you'll notice that every single Thieves' Gloves augment also made it into A tier. Pretty much that's because Thieves' Gloves is broken, right? If we're playing multiple anti-2s, if we're playing multiple Silas 2s, we're not going to have items for all these guys. And the thing is, Silas's best item arguably already is Thieves' Gloves in the late game. So it's like Thieves' Gloves is going to be the single most important item, or single best item, and every augment that gives you a Thieves' Gloves is going to be borderline insta-pick. So you really want to be gobbling up as many of those as possible. Encounters that give you Thieves' Gloves are good. Certain, like for example, Fortune can give you Thieves' Gloves. So something you can do with built diff is you just play Fortune in the early game. You're still sacking your early game. We talked about how built diff's already on the weaker side in the early game. So if you're sacking it with Fortune, it's perfectly acceptable. And then you're still playing at the same tempo, at the same cadence as everyone else, because once you get to stage 4, you're going to be leveling to 8 and rolling it all down and beefing up your board. So Fortune giving you added resources is just going to be really, really powerful in general. And then after that, I kind of just put like the standard broken utility items that you'll see on pretty much every single team comp. Morello's slightly worse. I'm not entirely sure why. I think Morello is outperformed by red buff on every single champion in the game. Even units that are ability powered, kind of like focused, red buff still kind of outperforms them. It's kind of weird, but that just means red buff is strictly a better item than Morello. Otherwise, Ionic Spark, Shiv, and Last Whisper, these don't really need an explanation, just because they provide shred of some sort, right? And then because you're always playing around a Silas, Ionic Spark is Silas's best item, maybe outside of Thieves' Gloves. It's going to be extremely strong, and then Shiv and Last Whisper are just almost don't really have to go too much into them. Shiv is especially good in this comp compared to normal comps, which is already still good in, just because you're getting more attack speed, and this is an item that scales with attack speed. Last Whisper, anytime you play a physical comp, you definitely want to be playing Last Whisper. Even Shrouds, I would probably even put in the A tier. It's a little bit of a weaker item in general, just because the meta like doesn't work out very well for it. And I think in general, you want to be avoiding like full frontline items in this comp anyway, and built diff anyway, just because they tend to be a little bit weaker and you have so much frontline anyway. But certain frontline items that you do want to be looking out for is Adaptive Helm and Redemption. I would say Adaptive Helm is probably one of the best items in the game right now. It's definitely top 5. I think in this comp, you're generally going to be looking to put Adaptive Helm on a frontliner, just because Adaptive Helm on a backliner has a little bit of negative synergy with a high attack speed. So you'll never be building something like a red buff adaptive. You'd much rather be building like a red buff Shojin, right? You'd much rather be scaling with the efficacy of each of your auto attacks rather than something that scales with time, something that Adaptive Helm does. That being said, Redemption's a really, really strong frontline item, just because it scales off total HP. So you'll notice that like anything that scales off total HP with built diff is going to be really, really powerful. So we'll have augments that kind of talk about that a little bit later on as well. But like Redemption is an item that scales off of HP, right? So it's going to be one of the strongest frontline items you can get in this comp. Otherwise, you're just filling out your items with like standard generic offensive items. Giant Slayer, Deathblade, Deathcap probably deserves to be somewhere up here as well. Just a really, really strong offensive item. Hurricane is an item that is best in slot on any unit that primarily auto attack damage. So casters don't use Runaan's very well, just because Riot nerfs the interaction between casters that kind of like proc multiple times. They just made it so that like units that you would assume proc Runaan's multiple times on their spell don't, just because it would be too strong of an interaction. So they made Runaan's a really, really strong auto attacker item. So any champ that auto attacks as their primary source of damage is going to use Runaan's Hurricane really well. In built diff, that tends to be more true, because for example, if you're playing Kaisa, normally I would say dominantly uses her spell for, I'd say like 80-ish% of her damage. This drops down a little bit because you don't have trick shot, right? You're used to having 4 trick shot. Obviously in built diff, you'll have 0 trick shot. So the power of her ult goes down dramatically. That being said, the power of her autos are becoming a lot higher, just because her attack speed is scaled up so much. Same thing with Ashe. Ashe in general is a pure auto attacker. Runaan's are already best in slot Ashe anyway. Runaan's one of the strongest early game slams in the game, just because it's really strong It just gives a lot of flat damage, something that early game units kind of like struggle with a little bit. But yeah, Renaissance Hurricane is definitely going to be one of the strongest AD items you can slam in this build. Okay, first of all, you should already be avoiding these 3 items no matter what comp you're playing, but it's especially bad in this comp because nobody's using Titans. After the most recent nerfs and changes to Titans, Silas doesn't even use Titans well anymore, so you don't even want to be building Titans and being like, oh, I'll just back up put on Silas. It is decent on Lee Sin. I'd say Lee Sin is slightly worse than some of the other units you can play just because you really want to be playing Aurelia. That being said, a Lee Sin 2 is going to go on your board no matter what, and in that case, you probably want to have a Titans or like a BT, something like that, Sterax as well. But for the most part, these items are not going to be used that well on the built diff units that you're going to be looking to play for most of the game. I try to avoid building this as much as possible. Jewel Gauntlet just sucks as an item. If you guys have known me for a while, known me for a couple sets, I've always preached that this item is really, really bad. Riot doesn't like this item, or I don't know if they like it or not. I don't know exactly kind of the reasoning for why they keep it so bad, but you're just gonna have to trust me that Jewel Gauntlet, numbers wise, just doesn't stack up against other items that are built to do the exact same thing. Mathematically, it's just not good at him. Sunfire right now doesn't do well. You really want to get some sort of backline burn. A lot of backliners are healing off of something, whether it be Gunblade or like Harmesis. Like, well, they're not healing that much, but like pretty much it is important to get the burn and the wound onto backliner units. That's why you're going to see a lot of comps build Morello and Red Buff. This set has an abundance of really good Morello spreaders. So in the early game, you're going to see units like Senna holds it really well, Zyra holds it really well, Janna holds it really well, Lux holds it pretty well, right? Kindred holds it extremely well. There's so many units that hold it super, super well in the early game that you really don't want to be thinking about something like Sunfire unless you absolutely have to, just because these items are just going to spread the effect a lot more efficiently than Sunfire. I guess next part up is augments. So when you're picking augments with built diff, you're definitely going to want to like think about like how do you scale the stats that built diff is giving you, right? So built diff is giving you an abundance of HP and attack speed. The best way to scale with HP and attack speed is to kind of like increase the number of resistances you have, increase the number of items you have. Obviously, this is a combat augment, so you won't be lacking items so much as it's going to guarantee that one of your augment choices is not going to give you items. So a lot of item augments are going to be really good. Obviously, I put the TG ones. I spoke about those already. Lucky Gloves is absolutely insane, honestly. I just put them all in the A tier just to like keep built up on the S tier, but realistically, Lucky Gloves is the single best augment you can get here. Heavy hitters is insane. So this is an augment that gives you attack and ability power based on the number of HP you have. So all your units are going to be above 1500 max HP just because built diff gives so much flat HP to your units. So pretty much this will be giving you a ton of AD and AP. And then what scales really well with attack speed in TFT, it's going to be AD and AP, right? So in terms of like an offensive stat that you want to be scaling with attack speed, you don't want to be like building more attack speed on top of attack speed, just because you don't get diminishing returns, but in terms of from an opportunity cost perspective, you do. So you'll notice that like I didn't put Inspiring Epitaph in here or Best Friends in here, just because those augments, despite being extremely strong in general and are still strong in built diff, they're just slightly less good than they normally would be. Whereas like certain other augments such as like Heavy Hitters, Unified Resistance, and Martyr just get a slight uptick in value that you otherwise wouldn't have if you weren't playing built diff. So otherwise, just like generic combat augments are still going to be really good. I said like not to build attack speed on top of attack speed. That being said, like there's so many good attack speed augments in the game that are just like slightly overstated to begin with, that even though theoretically they're not the best synergy to have with built diff, it's just they're going to be really good anyway. So pick them up. Like don't be skipping Epitaph. Epitaph obviously does still scale with HP just because it has a 25% max HP shield. Don't be skipping Tiny Bit Deadly unless like, you know, pretty much unless you have a good reason to, right? So, and then Lucky Gloves goes without saying, all your units, you're not going to be able to itemize all your units, but all your units can kind of act as like a carry or off carry anyway. And the best way to stack units that can't be a main carry but are an off carry is to put TGs on them. So all of these give TGs of some kind. A combo is actually slightly worse, but it's also slightly better kind of as well. Anyways, and then finally, I just have a couple sample boards depending on your level that you want to be playing. So I'm mostly going to be talking about level 6, 8, and 9, just because level 4, you're not going to have that many options in the early game, and then level 7 doesn't exist in TFT right now, more or less as a skippable. You really want to be like kind of like looking from your early game, which is level 4, 5, and 6, all the way straight to your level 8, and then obviously you're capping out at level 9. Level 10, there's not too much to talk about. You're just really just putting in legendaries at that point. So these are the main levels I'm talking about. So first, you want to fill out your backliner with, you want to like pretty much have a good split between the number of backliners and the number of frontliners you have. So generally when you're level 4 and 5, you want to be looking for a 2 to 3 frontliners split with 2-ish backliners. You generally want to have more frontliners than you have backliners, but by 1. So you don't want to be like 3 to 1, you want to be like 2 to 2, and then 3 to 2 frontliners to backliners. And some of the best backliners I already talked about. You're going to look at Zara, you're looking at Senna if you're playing AD. Kindred's another AP unit. These are the AP units you can play. A lot of the AD units in the early game aren't that good outside of just Caitlyn and Senna. Obviously, you can't play them together, and nor do you really ever want to. So it's completely fine because you're only going to be able to stack one of them. They're both slightly like less powerful without items. Just in a built diff board, so you're only really going to want to be playing one of them, and then you want to pair it up with like some sort of AP backliner. Obviously you can't play Alun and Jenna at the same time, so you just want to play one of them. Alun, once again, also doesn't fit with Darius, which is the strongest kind of early game unit, is both a frontliner and a backliner. I don't know, this unit kind of just really does it all. So in that case you can't play Alun, but Alun's also really good because she gives shred, right? So if you're playing around Zara and Kindred on level 6, then playing Zara, Kindred, and Alun is really strong just because Alun gives your team a little bit more attack speed, as well as shreds the units that Zara's going to be hitting. Obviously, if you don't have a Shiv at that point, it's going to be really useful to have that shred in case other people have like a D-Claw or a Stoneplate. Anything that gives them MR is going to be really valuable. Something I want to talk about your frontline setup, especially in the early game, is kind of like when to play synergies, right? So I'd say like for the most part, you're never really going to be playing Warden, but a team-wide synergy such as Bruiser or Ghostly is like something that you can definitely consider. So in the early game, build diff, once again, is not going to be that powerful. So what that means is that like I've noticed a lot of players, especially less experienced players, but even in like GM Challenger Plus, they're like unwilling to even play Bruiser. But if you think about like, if you put in Bruisers, you'll notice that your Aatrox and Kobuko literally have more HP than if you don't put in Bruiser. And then obviously you're losing the attack speed from build diff. But the thing is like, these are units in the front line that don't really use attack speed all that well, right? So because they're not using attack speed all that well, pretty much the only thing that really matters for your front line is shockingly, frontline stats. So because HP is your primary frontline stat, putting in Bruiser literally increases the HP of these units. So it's like two Bruiser is not something you should shy away from playing in the early game with built diff. It literally makes your team stronger. That's just something like I definitely needed to mention just for like, I don't know, people just are so afraid to put in any traits at all, but sometimes it's just correct, right? This is one of those cases. Something else you can do is like Ghostly. So Ghostly is a little bit worse. It is a team-wide trait, but you are going to be losing some tank stats to play it. That being said, certain team-wide traits are going to be quite valuable. I'd say primarily damage team-wide traits are going to be slightly worse just because your units are getting damage from built diff anyway, as well as like you're in a way losing damage to kind of gain damage because like I'm losing attack speed to gain like, let's say in the case of Arcanist it's AP, or in the case of Ghostly it's some sort of damage buff, so it's slightly worse. But something like Altruist is going to be like somewhat reasonable, right? So if I wanted to do this and Soraka, yeah, I lose a little bit of HP on these two units, but my entire team is benefiting a little bit in the form of Altruist, right? So that is something to look forward to. Just a couple sample boards you could be playing. Obviously, it doesn't really matter all that much exactly what you're playing because every game is going to be different, right? Because like if I'm playing Zara, then that means I can't play Diana. But obviously, if I'm not playing Zara, then I can be playing Diana. Same is true with like Caitlyn and Shen, right? Like if I am playing Caitlyn, then I obviously shouldn't be playing Shen. But if I'm not playing Caitlyn, then Shen is going to be perfectly reasonable to put on my board. Just a couple kind of like sample things to be playing on level 6. For the most part, it doesn't matter. You really are just going to be looking to get to level 8. I'd say outside of like Zara and like Janna, everything else is fine. You could play any frontliner you really want. Amumu and Alawi are the strongest ones, but for one reason or another, they end up not mattering. The level 8 ports do kind of matter, but they are also extremely easy. So Zara 2 is going to outperform Morgana 1 no matter what. So if you have Zara 2, even with 3 items, let's say Shojin, Morello, you're most frequently going to find Shojin, Morello, and like, let's say a random death cap on her, then we don't even have to think about Morgana until like, potentially not at all, but also until Morgana 2. So if you have the money to be holding a Morgana pair on your bench, then it's perfectly fine to do so. That being said, if you hit a reasonable board early on into your level 8, then we don't even have to, we can skip Morgana altogether and just hold Zara until late game, in which case we might find ourselves playing like Lissandra, or in the case of Morello, it's not strictly an AP item, so we can put that on Zara as well. We're going to be like putting Shojin on Lissandra anyway, so, and AP items. We can refund Morgana, or we can even just play a Hui, even though like, yes, I understand Hui doesn't actually work in built diff just because he always has this artist tag, and it does count towards breaking the built diff bonus. So stuff like Hui, stuff like Wukong does break the built diff bonus. There's an exception to that, which I will be talking about in just a moment. But anyways, looking at your level 8 board, you're just once again going to be really looking to play any of those 4 cost frontliners that we outlined at the start of the video: Annie, Stylus, Nautilus, and Ornn. And you're just going to play multiple of these, right? Like Ornn is especially powerful just because you're never going to be able to itemize all of your frontliners, but Ornn itemizes your frontliners, and he always casts once, right? So even 2 Ornn 1s, like say you have Annie 2, Annie 2, or Annie 2, Annie 1, but you have 2 Ornn 1s. Let's say this Annie is a 2-star, then these Ornns are going to be giving my Annie 2 some items. Same idea if I have like Silas 2. Silas is a little bit stranger just because he moves around, but same idea. You're just going to be playing any amalgamation of these types of 4-cost frontliners that you can, which is why the Amumu and the Alawi get dumped really quick, just because you really want to be playing that Nautilus. Nautilus 1 will always cast. 2 Nautilus 1s will also always cast. The thing to note maybe you could do is you put 1 Nautilus behind the other one, just because you want to have them casting at different intervals. So obviously if you put them both at the front, then you risk them both getting very similar amounts of mana and ulting at the same time, thus wasting one of their ults, because CC in this game doesn't stack. They just like resolve. Whichever happened later just resolves later. So you will be losing a little bit of value on that CC. And then because they're actually getting the attack speed, this is where you can take advantage of the attack speed given to you on frontliners by build diff. It's just you can put them 1 row behind and they'll walk up, and because their attack speed's higher, they'll just get more autos off than what you regularly see from a Nautilus, and that will still generate them enough mana to cast before the fight's over. Finally, we're going to have like the max cap board. Max cap board, you're still seeing multiple Annies, you're still seeing multiple Orns, you're still seeing multiple Nautilus, you still see multiple Salas. Obviously, if I have 2 Nautilus 2s, they're never getting dropped. They're staying on my board until the end of the game. Now, if I have like Annie 2 and Annie 1, Annie 1 gets dropped as soon as I find an Orn 2. Same idea, Salas 2. Now, if you have infinite gold, so this generally means like you fast 9 or fast 10 off a really strong one early to mid game. The strongest cap you could possibly have with this comp is Xayah Rakan. So the builders doesn't show it, but when you have Xayah Rakan together, traditional, like without build diff, you're gonna have 2 out of 1 lovers. And the thing is, 2 out of 1 lovers doesn't work. But the thing is, 2 out of 1 lovers works for build diff. So if I have 2 out of 1 lovers counts as inactivated. That means both of these are now active, right? I can play them with build diff. And the thing is, both of these units scale off attack speed really well. Xayah is the best AD carry cap in the game to begin with. This is true outside of build diff, and it's definitely true with build diff. So if you can make it to Xayah Rakan max cap, then that's ideal. That being said, you need at least 4 copies to get it going and 6 copies to really get it going, right? So when you're getting 6 copies of a single 5 cost, it's very, very uncommon. But 4 copies is acceptable, especially with duplicators with Hui. You can get that online. But otherwise, you're just capping out with standard cap. Most of the time, you're going to be looking to play double Lissandra. Double Lissandra is huge. I chose not to put it on the level 8 board because I tried to put no legendaries just on the setup, just because I want it to be something like you could always have access to. But obviously, once you're capping out, you're going at like double Lissandra 1 to start farming your items. Obviously, more attack speed means Lissandra's casting more, meaning more items, meaning more gold, meaning more cap, meaning more all beat, right? So just basic stuff. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the entire video. If you guys have any questions, obviously feel free to leave them down in the comments below. Otherwise, just find me on YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, Twitter, all at guubums. And yeah, hope you guys liked the video. And until next time, peace.